All right.
Their wall calendars are the best thing ever for them.
So thanks, everyone, for showing up. I thought I'd start a little bit differently today. So I have a little Mentimeter thingy. So I'm just curious. I want to know your thoughts on how test 2 was. So the code is 59860 for those that want to participate. Just open-ended question. You know, how was it compared to test 1? How was it compared to like what you were expecting? You know, I haven't seen all the midterms yet, so I don't know. I know I asked things in general about kind of how the course is going. So I will review all of those. So bad. Oh, see, already dissensus. So bad. Easy. Oh. So lots of different thoughts. Short answer. Okay, good. More straightforward, harder. See, this is good to know, right? Because, you know, for some of you it's harder. It seems like 50-50. It was harder for many, but easier for others too, right? Good. Kinda died. No. Spicy. Oh. Okay. Hard, also Toys R Us closed down. Toys R Us is a permanent fixture in my memory.
It's not actually fully closed. They did not go out of business. They're still operating. Can I ask you a quick question about test 2?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a quick question that I'm curious for SOS. Can you hear me? No. Okay, well, I'm just going to scream because it's easier. I have a quick question, a quick poll. So first option is that you find multiple choice easier than short answer, and the second option is you find short answer easier than multiple choice, okay? So put your hand up if you find multiple choice questions easier than short answer. Okay, and then put your hands up if you find short answer easier than multiple choice. Okay, so it's slightly more multiple choice. Thank you, I've seen
Okay. See, you guys are divided on everything. It makes it so hard, right? It's like every, you know, you get half fans, half haters for any option, right? No, I know. I'm not hater. You're speaking your mind. I want you to. So it's just, I'm saying in a perfect world, I would want everyone to say it's better. Okay. Okay, kind of blacked out. Okay. Okay. Well, so I will have more questions once I get once I see all of your midterms. I'll have more questions based around common themes. So in terms of, you know, Anyway, on that note, you guys should be happy because at this point now, you just have assignment number 3, and tutorials this week are going to be devoted to that. We're going to have a fun little interactive thing in the class involving interviews. So I won't give too much away, but it'll be a lot of fun, hopefully, for both you and your tutorial leaders. And then we just have the final exam. So, and of course the Revel and, you know, other tutorials. So we really are nearing the end. And again, this course is a double bonus because it's a full credit course, a full year course. So you're really like finishing 2 classes with this. So it'll be all the more fun, but also all the more sad when you finish. Yep. It will, but it will more heavily weigh everything that comes from this week. So again, things got a little bit messed up because this test was supposed to be February 4th, the midterm I mean, so there was a lot more content, and there's only 5 weeks of content left, so, and you know, the final is worth 25%, so I will probably have like twice as many questions per chapter from these weeks coming forward, just because this hasn't been tested so far, but you can count on, you know, 2 to 3 questions from every other chapter being asked. Again, major things, although it is more cumulative than test 2 was. So, and you know, the exam is not for a month and a half. So you have time to study. I know you have other courses, obviously, but I'm going to try to I'll try to rein in the material and give you some more guidance on what to study and everything, and hopefully have another SOS study session. I think we'll be able to do that again. Okay, so today I'm really glad for those of you that showed up. So we have a few things going on today. So we have our lecture, then after our 10-minute break or so, Professor Harold, so for those of you in first year, probably aren't taking any other sociology classes. I mean, you could be sitting in on them, but Professor Harold is in the sociology department like myself, and he will be coming in at about 3:15 today to talk about how and why you should major in sociology. So that will be a lot of fun. Again, it's okay if that's what you decide not to do. I'll promise to try to not take it too personally. Although of course I will, but but he'll come in and he'll tell you all the great things about sociology, and then of course I'll be around asking or available to answer any questions you may have. Sociology is a great major. It's what, you know, I'm very open that I took sociology and anthropology. That's a combination that I found to be a lot of fun. And a lot of my friends have double majored in things like sociology and biology, history, philosophy, economics, all sorts of things. Sociology is so broad, right? So as you saw, or as you're continuing to see that in this class, we have dozens of subfields, probably like 30 officially, but the list is ever growing, and I do think it complements anything that you take pretty well because of its breadth. Okay, so we have a lecture, then that's broken up by Josh Harold coming in, and then we have the introduction of my latest YouTube video. So as promised, so this one is both exciting and embarrassing. So I have my first kind of performance piece. Don't worry, I'm not going to dance or anything, but I have a conversation acted out by just with little old me of between Marx, Weber, and Durkheim. So it'll be, and you see the introduction of my students, of one of us from the Tuesday section though, but one of our very own students who drew a face photo of me. So I have an official digitized Lawrence that will make his way into the videos as well. So lots of fun stuff today, learning, program management, and videos. Okay, so week 17. Work and the political economy. So today we're organizing ourselves around the world of work and economics. Economics more as sociologists see it, which is, you know, not necessarily that different from how economists see it, but as bound up very closely with all of the other themes we've discussed so far in the course. So, you know, as true subjects of C. Wright Mills, disciples of him, anytime we approach a topic in sociology, and this should be sort of familiar to you by now, we always have this sociological or critical eye to what we're looking at. And so as we'll see in the world of work and the political economy, and I'll explain what that means, but for now just think of it as an economy. As sociologists looking at work in the political economy, we look at how people's options for employment, the nature of the economy, how these are dependent on the kinds of social institutions, norms, values, customs, and other just broad array of historical things that have happened in a society. So we'll see the economy as we define it, and we'll get into how you can kind of see that in a political way. Economics used to be called political economy, and now it's just economics. And sociology, we kind of argue that the political has to be seen within this. But basically, when we look at the economy as sociologists, we look at how production, distribution, and the consumption of goods in any given society may or may not be different. And so, this week I've gone on in probably almost every lecture for at least a few minutes. I've gone on about the Industrial Revolution. So this week, that's really the point of departure for what we're talking about how Western society, as we know it, has gone through multiple different forms of economies, and ultimately, at least for now, kind of settled on what we call post-industrial society, which is characterized, as we'll see, by service work, by flexible work, part-time work, work that's really bound up with all sorts of different social stratification, inequality, new valuation systems, multiculturalism. Again, a huge branching out of the Industrial Revolution, which was mostly focused just on the production of kind of tangible goods, and now into all sorts of things like being a professor, being a YouTuber, I'm just saying things that I am. I'm not a YouTuber, but yeah, I don't think you're allowed to say that when you only have 68 subscriptions. But whatever, but you can, anyway, so in the knowledge/service economy, and we'll kind of get to how those two are different but related, the world of work has rapidly changed. And again, I'm saying it's kind of where we've settled on for now. Things are still evolving. So again, why study the economy before we get into the differences, and why study work? Well, in terms of the latter, in terms of work, everything that we do in our particular society now of Toronto, Scarborough, everything we do ultimately is centered around work, if not directly, indirectly. Our week on socialization and on education, our weeks on those, we see how our families, and all of the schooling that we do is kind of training us for the labor market. We discussed kind of the reciprocity or feedback loop between higher education and the economy. Again, everything you take here is somewhat designed at least for jobs that are either available now or imagined to be available in the future. Again, part of the selling point, as you'll see when Josh comes in, of a discipline like sociology is that it is constantly evolving as work evolves. So learning about sociology puts you in a good place to kind of make projections about what's going on in the world, be open-minded, and not, expect to have a job that may not exist anymore. So again, work is central to all of our lives, for better or for worse. You'll see how people have been divided on that issue over time. And the economy is a massive yet invisible social structure that shapes all of our lives. Part of, as we'll see, living in a society that's called capitalist is that, money, for all intents and purposes, gives us or limits our agency to do what we want. There's a lot of times you may want to pack up and go on vacation. You may want to have early retirement. You may want to buy a house, whatever it is. All of these things are available more or less to some people than to others. And that's, again, based on your wealth, your income, all of these things. So again, work and the economy, like every other topic we've discussed so far, are central domains to sociologists. And it kind of like how I was excited about the crime week, I think I mentioned I mostly teach crime and deviance, but the work that I have ended up doing myself has been more on work. Again, in my dissertation, I interviewed people who felt stuck in their jobs, and theoretically I was interested in how people make sense of kind of having unmet expectations. So this week's really exciting for me. So economies through time. So we won't be going super deep into history this week, don't worry, but just a rough sketch. of economies over time, I think will help add a little bit more depth to what we've, or to what I've kind of referred to as the Industrial Revolution several times throughout the year. I think it's easy, so just so we see where the story goes. It ends in post-industrialization. We'll see how agriculture and industrialization led to that, and then how these three forms of economies led subsequently to those ones. So, hunting and gathering. So typically when you think of what are called, I know in the Culture Week I use these terms, when you think of small scale, simple, or tribal societies. Again, these are anthropological terms, ways that researchers people who study human behavior and social formations, these are ways categories they've developed to understand human variation. A society that is in a hunting and gathering economy, the vast bulk of their resources come through, it's usually called gathering and hunting now, because usually the bulk of their resources come through the gathering of resources around them. So things like plants, seeds, nuts, whatever the society deems edible in the time. It may be ingredients to make medicines, and hunting. So the hunting of live game, animals. So these societies, you'll see in each of these economies, and I kind of use economy and society roughly interchangeably because it's just hard to imagine. Every society has an economy. So you know, if an economist may be mad with my loose usage of it, but for the purposes of this class, economies and societies in this lecture anyway will be used somewhat interchangeably. So in hunter-gathering economies / societies, resource exploitation, so you'll see that word a lot, or that term, which doesn't mean people necessarily exploiting and like victimizing resources, but it means people harvesting resources, taking use of them, making use of them. That can become exploitative if you like destroy all the resources and rip trees out of the ground and all of that. But usually resource exploitation just means making use of resources. So hunting and gather societies, many people that are very interested, so to kind of bring that full circle, many people that are interested in conservation and kind of environmental health and climate health, they often mention one of the big positive aspects of hunting and gathering, which was that in these economies, the resources are lightly tapped. So in these societies, people are highly nomadic, meaning they wander around looking for areas that they can find animals to hunt and resources to extract. They don't interfere with their environments very much. They don't augment the structure of nature very much. Again, you can just picture people more moving around and taking what they can and not going too deep into any one area. Once people, and again, I'm just to make these not seem like 5 or 6 totally separate things, I am going to present them as kind of a narrative history based on Western history. Although, again, this is not a one-size model for all societies or time periods. So if we see hunting and gathering as kind of early humans' attempts to act as a social organism, the next stage, once they start to develop their hunting skills, their gathering skills, once they develop, the rudiments of things like recipes, they may phase into what's called horticulturalism. And so horticulturalism here, certain of the things, so some of the plants, the seeds, things that are, inanimate objects, I mean, they're living, but non-human, non-mammal, non-animal. Some of those items start to be domesticated, so people may start growing certain kinds of plants, potentially, although probably not at this stage, potentially doing things like pickling and fermenting, and they may start domesticating some species of animals. So here they're starting, just doing an anachronistic thing, taking someone from now and putting them back then, or in a society that's doing that still now. Just think of someone now saying, hey, we're wandering around a lot. Why don't we try to have some of these things that we find work for us? Maybe raise some animals, domesticate them, take eggs, and see if we can kind of grow plants from the seeds that they generate and stuff. So here societies start to get more complex and population rates go up because horticulturalist societies, as opposed to hunting and gathering societies, start to develop more food and have more kind of surplus resources at their disposal. The next stage of kind of societal evolution, and again, this is many societies around the world they do or they have one of these kinds of economies. Again, I'm just framing it as a kind of evolutionary lineage because this is typically how societies evolve. But they don't have to, and I'm not judging the different phases. Pastoralism is next on this kind of phase of kind of becoming increasingly modern. So here, they're still nomadic. People still are looking for greener pastures. Here, quite literally, they're looking for greener pastures. Looking for greener pastures is just an expression saying, you're looking for better things. In this case, pastoralists are actually people who herd animals. They're not quite livestock at this point, but they may be herding things like sheep, possibly cows and cattle, and with these herds, they try to keep them in spaces where those herds can stay nourished and they can start to extract resources from them. So things like wool from sheep are extracted. So you start to see rapid sophistication in the kind of clothing and even like house infrastructure that's built. People now are really upping the game on resource exploitation and thinking, okay, what can we take out of animals and plants and nature around us? We still are not like settled down yet. We haven't figured out a way to make permanent use of these structures, but we're getting sufficiently more advanced. So again, usually nomadic. Some of these societies do become sufficiently complex that they can kind of stick around in one area. And then agriculture. So so you'll see now the terms start to change a bit. So hunting and gathering, horticulturalism and pastoralism. Some people may see horticulturalism and pastoralism as revolutions, but the major kind of first revolution in a sociological sense, as far as I know anyway, was the agricultural revolution. So this really took aspects of all three of the other phases together, plus added what was called, or what you could think of as being sedentary, meaning kind of trying to remain in one space. If you tell someone they're sedentary, it means they're not moving around. So like an office worker is often called sedentary. So agriculture here is, okay, we figured out we can extract resources from around us, be they plants or animals or other things in our local environment. Let's really work to make these things constantly work for us. So in agriculture, the plant growth from horticulturalism and the use of some animals like small pigs and maybe chickens, those start to take on some of the qualities of pastoralism. So pastoralism, again, was about putting these resources together. So herding, if you're herding people, again, it means you're bringing them together, H-E-R-D-I-N-G. So agriculture uses the logic of herding, and it uses the logic of growth. And it says, well, let's get all of our resources together and continually grow. So here, farms are starting to be developed for the first time, and they're really like ecosystems. So in farms, you'll have the production of all sorts of plants, vegetables, fruits, edibles. You'll now have herds of animals that become renamed livestock because they are stock items. So like the same way that inanimate objects are, a stock in a clothing store is their jeans and t-shirts. Stocks in the investment market or different companies. Livestock are living stock, so pigs, chickens, whatever. And so in these farms, as pictured there, you have this world of goods, all of which are alive, but some of which are human, the farmers themselves, some of which are mammals primarily, and some of which are plants and fruits and vegetables and things. Key here too, so inspiring industrialization, is that animals begin to be used for more than just eating. So composting, using the excrement of animals to increase fertilization, using cattle and things like horses to pull carriages, all sorts of evolutions start taking place here. And the kind of human-animal relationship becomes both much stronger, but also, of course, according to vegetarians and members of PETA and many people that have been critical of the agricultural revolution in terms of its long-term effects, we also become more exploitative of animals in kind of the traditional term of exploitation. Again, now that we on a large scale, what's now called factory farming, we really do harvest a ton of both organic materials like eggs and milk, but also the bodies in the form of meat of animals around the world at a large scale. So again, sociologically, the agriculture marked really the primary modern economic revolution, because now we had a means to provide food for large populations of people. And we still use farms now. So that shows we don't really do the other things so much here anymore, but agriculture is still a major industry, and that is how we're all fed. So things like, even if you go, once a week here, I think on Wednesdays, they have their farmers market, right? And where I live downtown, there's St. Lawrence Market near me. Okay, so so the agricultural revolution, after that comes industrialization, that thing I always talk about. So this hopefully gave you a bit more context to that period I kept talking about. So remember, I always kept framing industrialization as people were largely living on farms, so the agricultural revolution, families, what now would be considered extended families. So again, people moving out of their pastures, and again, I'm painting a gross historical story, lumping a lot of things together, but again, roughly this is how it occurred. People phased out of the previous modes of subsistence. They develop what are called self-subsisting farms. So again, imagine you're living on a farm with your family, producing your own food, producing your own clothing using things like sheep and whatnot. And this starts to evolve, but really takes off when industry becomes sufficiently advanced and when people start to figure out, hey, we can do what we're doing on a large scale by dividing labor. So we don't have to have everyone in separate farms kind of doing all of this redundant work, like everyone pretending they're, at the beginning of modern civilization. We can build things like factories. We can use that herding logic and say, okay, everyone who makes X, go to this factory. Everyone who makes Y, go to this factory. I'm jumping forward and backwards in history, but think of today. People, any store that you go to relies on labor that's occurring in multiple factories around the world. If you're buying clothing, there will be factories that focus more on cotton goods, others that focus more on polyester, others that focus on blends. This logic of, again, the herding combined with the division of labor led to a massive growth in industry, which then allowed for the production and then consumption of resources to really, really grow at an exponential stage. So that's what's meant, the herding logic I'm saying was the centralization of work and the mass production, specialization, and wage labor. So again, rather than having kind of separate households producing their own goods and maybe bartering with one another, this kind of puts that as the economic mandate in a society. Remember vagrancy laws in early Britain that I talked about, people who were, coming out of the agricultural revolution who really enjoyed working on their farms. Their contracts with their leaseholders, again, history is very similar to today in most ways. They were essentially on rented property and lots from like feudal lords most of the time, and these contracts became nullified, and these people had to now work in factories. So that's why I said this was a painful moment for many people not wanting to leave what they were doing, and ultimately the forcing of that process led to post-industrialization. So this is the time of now. And you might be asking, well, why is it post-industrialization when, he's talking about factories and the division of labor and all of these things which still exist today? Well, this is because industrialization, again, is usually seen as happening, 100, 150 years ago, roughly. It starts earlier, extends later. But think of it as like, 1900-ish. All those photos you see in black and white of working class families really struggling in like labor mills. Post-industrialization marks the current era and takes globalization and technology. I would say those are probably the two major factors that differ from 100 years ago and now. The major impact of these two things. So globalization on the one hand, when you think of things, we'll get to capitalism and state welfare capitalism and all of that. But when you think of societies now, pretty much every society that's in conversation with, say, America or any large global power, they have money as their primary mode of exchange. They have stock markets. They have industries that are sensible from the kind of Western perspective. Again, this is not we'll end the class with globalization and kind of the West's impact on other countries. But for now, just think again, the reason America has been seen as a global superpower and why people are really kind of obsessed with their news and stuff is that their way of, exploiting resources and dealing with the world has come to kind of dominate much of the contemporary world. And so, all sorts of other disciplines like political science and geography, human geography, international relations, they take on those questions more than we will. But again, thinking of our contemporary economy, globalization, meaning the relationships between multiple countries centered around ideas of work, labor, wage structure, status. These are big central questions shaping all of our lives. And so again, today, globalization impacts that. And as we'll see, and where we'll get to deeper in this lecture, increases in technology. Or advances in technology, rather. So remember, I said one of the key aspects of industrialization itself was advances in technology that allowed for the consolidation of labor to happen within factories. So like production looms, so advances in sewing machines, advances in machinery that could make things like auto parts. These keep getting refined. And around the 50s and 60s, more technological advances in computing and telecommunications. Those had started earlier, but that was kind of the bubble where they really started exploding. Advances in telecommunications and computers have now become central. So we're often seen as being, in the technical or technological knowledge economy, service economy, and we're now in a point where most of, people's intellectual power or intelligence labor is not being directed towards the production of like tangible goods, but more intangibles. So when you just look at the kind of careers people have, things like consultants, educators, these people all fit under the umbrella of knowledge workers. And probably most of you in this room want to have some sort of career in that way. Lawyer, doctor, any kind of professional job. Something that ideally can't be replaced by a machine. again, if we learn from the past as sociologists, you would think, okay, I want to make sure I have a meaningful career that can't be mechanized or reduced to some sort of automatic division of labor, right? So most people, you know, they don't imagine themselves, you know, I want to make this specific computer chip because, well, A, that probably wouldn't seem super fascinating in itself, and B, you'd probably think, well, that's something that maybe a machine would be better at doing than me. So globalization and technology characterize kind of the two major sociological factors that differentiate post-industrialism from industrialization, I would say. But in terms of how people spend their time and what work looks like, remember usually when I would talk about the Industrial Revolution, I mentioned how people worked in long shifts, people were not paid very well, the conditions were often exploitative in the usual sense of the word. Work is still far from perfect for most people now, but rather than being full-time and kind of fixed in location, we're increasingly seeing people working multiple jobs, people working part-time, and in part due to women's massive entry into the labor force over the last 30, 40 years in high numbers, and the fact that women typically bear the responsibility more than men, for better or worse, of rearing children. This has caused an increase in flexible work as well. So people wanting more flex work policies to be able to you know, bring kids to work, stay at home with kids, things like maternity and paternity, parental leave, and so on and so forth. So again, kind of lasting key facts of this, think globalization, technology, and work schedules, the kind of place and timing of work. Okay, so sorry for all of that. I just wanted to get the kind of deep historical context out. And then we'll have study buddy number one. So again, I've focused on what I see the key differentiators to be, but as you know in this class, and sociology more generally, it's not really super easy or productive to just reduce things to a few things. There are many things that I could be missing from my own kind of schematization or categorization of these periods. So what I'd like you to do is just think through all of these themes. These are things that should be relatable to everyone, particularly if you've immigrated here from somewhere else, or you have family in another country, or you're interested generally in history and anthropology. I'd just like you to think, you know, what are, in your perspectives, the key differences between industrialism and post-industrialism? So again, think back, think to anything historical you've seen, things I've said. What marks these two economies as different? And again, this is important because, you know, going back to the culture week, the kind of industry we have, the kind of economy we have really shapes everything we do, not just related to work. So when comparing industrial and post-industrial societies, some questions to think about. Where does work take place? What kinds of jobs exist in each type of economy? And what might people like or dislike about their work in each economy? And again, these are broad categories. It's not always easy to put a society into one of these categories, but they're just, again, ways of attempting to make sense of all the variation we see in the world. All right, so if you just start discussing these questions with your lifelong study buddy for a few minutes, and then we'll take it up. I'm still hearing nice talk, so I'll let you. Oh, okay, that worked. So does anyone want to share what they and their buddies came up with? Any budding nuggets of insight to harvest and exploit? Well, maybe if I frame it that way, that makes it sound a bit weird. Yep.
We were talking about how, like, I don't know, like how when I hear like industrialism versus post-industrialism, I think of like quality and quantity. So like industrialism was more focused on like mass production of like, tangible goods.
Yep. It's a great way of putting it.
Has like it's intangible. It's harder to like quantify what we're doing now. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a really great observation from the front. So quantity and quality. So I'm teaching a course right now, the social psychology of work, and I introduced students in the beginning of the year to this what's a really interesting subfield of psychology. I know many of you are thinking of taking psychology, which is great if you double major in sociology and psychology, that is. But so there's a really interesting subfield of psychology called industrial organizational psychology. And if you look at the kind of theories and work they did in the early 20th century, it focused exactly on what that student said. So industrialism was really, again, and you know, we often paint the past as like things were very simple. But these were humans like us, you know, believe it or not, 100 years ago. And they were like, wow, we have the means to make so much stuff. And so the focus really was on quantification and just the production of goods. But starting, you know, really around that time I mentioned of roughly around 1950, quality became more of a focus. And again, not just quality in terms of the quality of goods, but the quality of people's work experiences. So now that this new economy was really thriving, again at that point the industrial economy, all of the kind of negative aspects of it, like people feeling stuck in their work, feeling underpaid, having like life crises about how to spend their time, those impacted the nature of work. And we see now, you know, thinking of millennials and Gen Zs and whatever we're all called, well, I'm obviously not a Gen Z. I'm like 12 years too old for that. But our generations are marked again, as I've said, by the amount of deliberation and time we spend really thinking about work. Work is very central to our lives, but we're optimistic, but we're also very critical of it. So that's a great, I would say, distinction between the two of quantity versus quality. Anything else? Again, there's no right or wrong, just observations. We're building that sociological imagination. We only have 5 weeks left to build it, and then it's up to you guys to build it for the rest of your lives. But anything else? Yep.
Well, I would say during like industrialism, like work was more like sedentary. Like you had to be somewhere to do something. Like for instance, like if you're producing like shirts or something, you had to be like at home, or not at home, actually at like the factories, you know, sewing or whatever. But now in this age, like you could be working from, you know, at home in a coffee shop, like, you know, on the bus even, things like that. So like it's more freedom for the person.
Right, so work in the past was fixed in terms of its location, and it was bound, whereas now, and this really ties in with globalization, but in a different way. So now work is much more remote. So again, my partner works remote. He will sometimes do demos in person of the software that he sells, but very frequently he'll use this technology that's called WebEx, so he can like virtual demo. And so that's just one example. I know when I started my YouTube channel and I was looking into, you know, all these things about being influencers and whatever. And in my secret Instagram channel, which I will expose at the end of the year, so you'll see what, you know, what this isn't something totally new. I've had these delusions for a while. But when I look into influencers and stuff, one of the things that makes that kind of work so attractive is that, you know, you see people working from coffee shops all around the world, things like WeWork and co-working spaces. These are very different. So it ties into, again, the quality of work, people not wanting to feel stuck in one space, the fact that people are producing intellectual goods and intangibles, as both students said. So we're selling ideas, sales pitches, content for online blogs, all these sorts of things. So this has greatly changed kind of the day in, day out function of work for many people. Okay, so any other insights, or we'll move on? Yep.
So one thing we talked about was the rise of white collars and basically how before industrialization was really bad for health and things were kind of dirty and unclean and unsanitary and illnesses were rising. And now with white collar work, sort of like clean offices and the quality of life is just higher because of it.
So what would, just in your mind, what's the primary difference between white collar and blue collar work? Like what kind of industries were they involved in? You know it. Like what do white collar and blue collar people do? That's different. Sorry, so there's the increase in white collar, but what's blue collar work?
When I said white collar was this historical concept of the colors actually being white because they don't get dirty.
Yeah, yeah.
So that came up with white collar.
Exactly.
Not actual like white collar jobs. Not like capitalized white collar, but I mean like actual white collars.
No, but those two things are related. So the idea, no, that's what I was probing you for. So the idea of white collar, of jobs becoming more white collar over time means they're becoming increasingly less physically dirty and demanding. At the same time though, labor has become more divided. So we now have, I mean, we still have the jobs where people have to get their collars dirty, plumbers, mechanics, not dirty in their usual way unless you have people throwing coffee on you or whatever, but service restaurants, fast food, those aren't quite blue collar. Again, blue collar was more, you know, mechanics, handsy jobs, but low-paid service work, those don't quite have, you know, one particular color of collar in terms of metaphor, but they're not white collar. Again, white collar means jobs which, you know, we'll get to that later, but jobs that are typically seen as more professional and more kind of above the realm of the profane, in Durkheim's words. Yep.
I also wanted to say that in terms of industrial jobs, it's more like ascribed rather than achieved status. But with education in post-industrial kind of environment, they can move around. The social status is more like the mobility is more flexible.
Definitely. So education plays a huge role in this process as well too. So we have, again, white collar versus blue collar. There are these jobs which are becoming better, less dirty, people more removed from kind of the means and modes of production. But this was made possible by all of the increases in education that we saw. And so in the second half of the lecture after the break, we'll really be focusing again kind of on the questions we had in the education week. Remember we talked about the sort of hegemony of the higher education institution and credentialization, McDonald'sization, kind of how, you know, historically education helped us shift from labor by means of ascribed status to then achieved status, but then the problematic that created was now education is this new mandatory, almost kind of ascribed thing you have to do, like a forced achievement in a way, and that's meant much of, you know, hopefully no one in this class, but many people that are kind of feel that university is like a hoop they have to go through. That's often due to the fact that now, as we'll see, the kind of biggest guarantee of not being unemployed as an adult is having increasing amounts of education. Okay, so on that ambivalent note, we'll take a 10-minute break, and Josh, our presenter who's here, will set up his wonderful presentation. And then, so again, please stick around. If you want to leave early, that's okay, but as usual. But today, please do stick around after the break, because we will be having our nice program day presentation and convincing all y'all to major in sociology. Will now be speaking to you about program day. So if you can just give him a nice SOCA03 warm welcome, that'll be great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So, can you hear me okay? Is the mic okay? Okay, so well, it's nice to meet you all. I'm here because, as Lawrence mentioned, I want to talk to you a little bit about the sociology program here at UTSC. And as many of you may know, this month, first-year students are expected to start to think about and perhaps even declare their program of study. And so I'm going to pass along some of the information that I can about the program, just to inform your decision a little bit better. If you don't mind me asking, just with a show of hands, how many of you have made a decision about what you're going to major in? Okay, and how many of you have decided that sociology is something you'd like to pursue? Oh, wow, okay. And how many, just with a show of hands, are still somewhat unsure? Okay. So one of the main questions I'm going to address for you today is why choose sociology? Now, I just want to mention I don't get any kickbacks or anything like that if you choose sociology, but I do hope you'll give it some serious thought because, as you'll see, there are a number of important, consequences, right, that can come about in terms of employment and developing some communication and analytical skills. So, just some quick facts for you here. A sociologist is among the top 200 jobs, ranked number 11 on careercast.com. Sociology majors also find their pay often going up, had the largest salary increase, almost 11% among all university majors, according to Forbes. And sociology at U of T is recognized globally and nationally as one of the leaders in developing students for today's economy. U of T sociology is ranked number 1 in Canada and ranked number 12 in the entire world. So your decision to study sociology and to study sociology at U of T places you, among these rankings. So, those of you who haven't yet made a decision, or perhaps those of you who have but are unsure why you made the decision, let me sort of reinforce for you what it is that sociologists do, both inside and outside of academia, and why perhaps you might choose sociology as a program of study. One of the compelling reasons is that sociologists involve themselves in the big issues of today, and inequalities based on race and gender, sexual orientation, and so forth are a major avenue of study for sociologists. Sociologists also look at institutions like the family, workplaces, prisons, states, and the processes around these, like globalization, democratization, immigration, right? Policies related to health, multiculturalism, incarceration, and the arts. All of these, not necessarily in isolation from one another, right? But the ways that they intersect in really meaningful and important ways are often the focus of sociological inquiry. So in studying these big issues, not only are you developing knowledge and a repertoire that will situate you in a position where you can make meaningful contributions to society, whether in government or industry or within academia itself, you're also acquiring a repertoire of knowledge that will serve you personally well in navigating our social world. When you choose sociology as a program of study, you develop a number of transferable skills, skills that employers are really seeking today in candidates. The topics, in studying the topics that I just mentioned, right, you get a sense of, the type of skills that are cultivated by studying sociology. You learn, first and foremost, of course, how social actions, different processes and institutions are patterned. And we learn also about how our individual choices, how our behaviors, right, our personal interactions are situated within those broader structural contexts. So when you study these problems and these issues and these policies, right, it teaches us a sort of system-level way of thinking. Right? So first and foremost, we start to develop problem-solving skills. And again, these are skills sought by employers, right? Analytical capabilities, whether you are writing qualitative or quantitative papers using qualitative or quantitative data, developing the capacity to design and carry out your own research. Right? One of the other really important skills that you'll cultivate in the program is quantitative reasoning. So when you are confronted with graphs and charts and data, knowing how to read that, knowing how to interpret that, and also knowing how to use software to create and work with that quantitative data. Creative thinking, that is not just identifying problems, but also bringing creative solutions to them. Right? This is what sociologists focus on, and of course communication skills. Not only when it comes time for a job interview perhaps, right, but also being able to interact meaningfully with coworkers, colleagues, right, again, in finding solutions to problems and working cooperatively with others. So If you're wondering why it is that learning how to do research is important, it's because when it comes time for decision making, right, whether in academia or in your place of employment, being able to make a decision is always based on sound empirical research, right? So when we understand how research should be done, we become a critical consumer of information. Right? We can spot flawed research. We can better position ourselves in the labor market and elsewhere, right? As sort of high achievers in our field. So, in the sociology department, we have a long tradition and belief in learning by doing. Right? So there will be, I know in first year now, but there will be lots of opportunities, right, to try your hand at conducting research through coursework that you're going to take, and also through activities outside of class. I'm organizing this year the Undergraduate Research Day, where we've invited a number of outstanding undergraduate students to, to celebrate their work and to network with other peers and faculty and to present their research. Again, developing some of these critical skills. And being a good writer, of course, is important no matter what type of career path you decide to pursue. So sociology offers an opportunity, right, to show you how to present, how to defend a position through your writing, something that's becoming increasingly important in the labor market today. So, oops, there we are. So some of you may already know, but I just want to reiterate the department's approach to undergraduate training. In your first year, which I'm sure many of you are now, we are sort of introducing the discipline to you. Next year, you can expect to, extend a lot of the theories and ideas and concepts and empirical cases that you're being introduced to now when you begin to develop more fully the theoretical foundations of the discipline. So classical sociological theory, right? Begin to strengthen writing skills, work to learn the logic of argumentation, right? The logic of social inquiry and social research, introduces students to the different ways that research can be conceptualized, designed, and carried out, either qualitatively or quantitatively. And you'll start to try designing and carrying out your own research projects. And this is a great opportunity to develop your own interests in sociology and perhaps even pique new ones. Years 3 and 4, as you get later into the program, of course, there is a continued focus on refining your writing skills, taking research courses, and you have more opportunity to delve into more specific subfields within sociology. So if you're particularly interested in immigration or culture, right, or certain forms of inequality or policy, this is a great opportunity in these years to really delve into those specializations within the field. Any questions so far? Okay, couple of other points here. So in deciding whether or not sociology is something you'd like to pursue, consider that you can, of course, major in sociology, and there are 2 minors in sociology that you can also pursue. One is in culture, creativity, and cities. And I'm not going to go into too much detail. There are some online resources I'll refer you to in just a minute. But here, students are able to develop a sort of in-depth understanding of the relationship between cultures and cities, right? Space and culture. So it's interdisciplinary in terms of its content and method, and much like the minor in migration and ethnic diversity, provides students with the opportunity for experiential learning. That is, again, learning by doing, right? Getting those skills ready and honed for the marketplace. The second one, migration and ethnic diversity, offers students the opportunity to study more in depth the causes and the consequences of international migration, of ethnic identities and racial identities. So, if you are thinking perhaps that sociology might be a good fit for you, and perhaps you're considering doing a double major, consider also that sociology goes well with a number of other programs, right? Health studies, psychology, philosophy, public policy, right? Economics, life sciences, and many others. It's increasingly becoming recognized that any one sort of discipline on its own doesn't provide a very robust understanding of the topic itself. And I'll give you an example even with medicine, right? Understanding that medicine, or that health we could say, right, is socially determined in meaningful ways, right? That is the social determinants of health. Understanding those in conjunction with medicine, for instance, right, provides a much more well-rounded, robust picture of what's going on in our social world in that particular area. So, you know, think about what your interests are and think about how sociology can help to, you know, emphasize some of the other aspects you may be interested in. So what can you do with a degree in sociology? There are endless possibilities available. A BA in sociology will let you pursue graduate school if that's of interest to you. You may enter the job market immediately after your BA. That's okay too. Provides you with the skills needed in health or education, public policy analysis, work in government or business, criminal justice, law, right? Human resource management. So studying sociology, I mean, the key really is that it gives you those core competencies. It gives you those skills that employers are seeking in a workforce, right? In a labor market. So these skills are developed in the sociology program through a number of different processes, some of which I've talked about. And just to sort of reiterate, in the sociology program, because there are smaller class sizes, right, you get to work more closely with faculty, with experts in those areas, and you get to develop a sort of practical application, if you will, right, through practicums, designing your own research, and you can take these skills and this knowledge directly to employers and let them know that you're able to perform well in the capacity of your job. Those who have taken sociology at UTSC, you know, have gone on to achieve some really remarkable things in terms of jobs and career. Here's just a few highlights or examples for you. Interning with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, pursuing a career in academia, working as assistant professors at universities, working in law firms, articling, right, sales for online travel, leisure publishers, research assistants as well, right? And it's becoming increasingly well known that good public policy relies on good quality research, right? So working in the government, working in that capacity, sociology will serve you well in that regard as well. Serving as a policy advisor, just as an instance, to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Postgraduate studies, of course, pursuing a master's degree or a PhD at the University of Toronto and elsewhere, British Columbia. A lot of opportunities available with sociology. So, if you'd like some more information, I'm happy to give it to you, but you should also please check out the website here. utsc.utoronto.ca/sociology, and you can look at the tip sheet that's on there as well. Sort of reiterate some of the points I made about the types of competencies and skills, the types of entry-level jobs and grad school information that may be of interest to many of you. And just some important emails to take down. And I'm sure we can probably make the slides available, right? In the department, if you have any specific questions about course requirements, things like that, please get in touch with the appropriate people here. And on that note of course requirements, you should know that the courses required for the major in sociology can all be taken during the summertime, so those core courses, which will sort of put you ahead in a sense for the coming school year, right, to have those under your belt already, and then you can start to pursue those more specialized topics that may be of interest to you. Okay, are there any questions? Yes?
The summer courses, is it available this summer or next summer?
So my understanding is that they're available this summer, right? Yeah, and I can double check that and pass the information to Lawrence. But yes, they should be available this summer, right? Which means you can get those sort of right off the bat.
They're usually available every summer.
Yeah.
But the last like 4 summers, both of the they've been available. So.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate the time. If anything else comes up, I can leave my email, or you can, of course, get in touch with Professor Williams here. So thank you very much for that.
All righty. All right. So talking about doing sociology and getting jobs and all of that, we'll revisit those questions again. I'm really happy. Again, looking around the room, I know a lot of you aren't here, but well, you know, a lot of you on the interweb aren't here. But of those here, I'm happy to see that so many of you are considering majoring in sociology. Again, both Josh and myself obviously majored in it, and we like to think that we enjoy it. And that all of you will enjoy it as well. And again, I think sociology is pretty easy to sell because it's so broad, right? You can really, me and Josh, just for example, do totally different things, and that's okay. You can study anything under the sun, really, in this discipline. Okay, so now we'll move into the economy before we, and some other topics before we wrap up. So when looking at the contemporary economy, again, we'll get to how that's a combination of capitalism or welfare state capitalism. It's important to see that there are three major sectors within the economy. And these sectors, again, their salience or their predominance, the extent to which most work takes place in any of these sectors, this has changed over time. So the primary sector, ironically, as you'll see, is constituted of constitutes less than 2% of the Canadian workforce. So the primary sector has many of those jobs that would have really, you know, in their core form would have originated in previous versions of the economy or simpler versions of the economy, like in pastoralism and agriculture. So things like logging, you know, cutting down trees, farming, mining, fishing, essentially all different ways of exploiting the natural environment. So again, those are primary in that these are any society's kind of core infrastructural jobs, but they have increasingly been automated. The Industrial Revolution even caused these tasks to be done by fewer people as well over time. And right now, you know, they're not. For most people, say living in urban cores, these wouldn't be very attractive jobs. Moving somewhere rural and doing one of these occupations is not on the minds of as many people as it once was. Then in terms of kind of growth of a society or how core it is, but also not utilized by very many people or occupied by very many people, are the jobs within the secondary sector. So again, these make sense when you think of the terms. They should be easy to remember. Again, primary is kind of those core functions in a society, so natural resources. And again, I don't mean core in a social sense. I just mean, you know, what basic things do you think a group of people living in, you know, the same geographical region do they need? Well, they need food, and then they need shelter. So food is the primary, really, and shelter is the secondary. So shelter and things that go along with it. So cars, furniture, houses. There are still many people doing these sorts of jobs, but they've been decreasing in number, again, through automation. So about 10% of the labor force. And then lastly is the tertiary sector. So meaning kind of like above, tertiary to the primary and secondary sector. So these are service-oriented jobs and increasingly knowledge-oriented jobs. Knowledge and service are often related. Again, the example of a professor or a teacher. I'm disseminating knowledge, but if you look at my training manuals or anything like that, most of my work is seen as being constituted as service-oriented. Again, I'm not just teaching a blank slate or a wall or something, hopefully, but I'm teaching people that have their own needs and desires and preferences. That's why, at the end of the year you get course evaluations and to fill out, and I ask you on several occasions kind of what's working and what isn't. Because ultimately, the knowledge that I disseminate or attempt to disseminate is only meaningful if it's actually being received. And so even things like police officers can be seen as service-oriented, again, because even though, you may see them as these people in uniforms that are upholding the law, ultimately they are serving and protecting society. So many jobs that you may not think aren't like being a waiter or salesperson or something, customer service rep, fall under this umbrella of service. Again, most of the jobs and careers that you'll want, like lawyers and doctors, these are all ultimately about using advanced technical skills or knowledge skills and deploying them in a more human relations manner than in the past. So these are 75% of all jobs, and they continue to grow. So again, primary, secondary, tertiary, going from the harvesting and of natural resources, then to secondary use of those resources. So again, a logger goes and gets wood. Then someone in the secondary industry uses that wood to build infrastructure in the form of homes, furniture, so on and so forth. And then the tertiary sector is really putting these things, helping build these things through service. So designers in the case of furniture, architects in the case of homes. So the primary, now, so not to be confused, so this is probably the most confusing. It's not difficult to know the difference, but the words are similar. So these are sectors, okay? So when you think of the word sector, think of you are kind of dividing a pie and saying, okay, what proportions are harvesting natural resources, secondarily using those, and then providing a higher level service function. So those are sectors. Now, labor markets are different from sectors. And this is just confusing because we use the words primary and secondary again. So primary labor market, so an easy way to think of this is, and I would take a note of this, an easy way to think of this is most occupations that a person that goes to college or university for would be in the tertiary sector and the primary labor market, okay? So I'll explain that. So again, the tertiary sector is service and knowledge oriented. So again, if you want to be a teacher, lawyer, doctor, CEO, business person more generally, you're a tertiary, and you're also in the primary labor market. The primary labor market is characterized by jobs that are well-paying, are relatively stable, and usually need post-secondary training. So all of those jobs I just listed. They are ones that require credentials, not just in some credential inflated sense, but they require credentials because they require specific skills and training that presumably most people would not have acquired otherwise. So again, society's changing still. So I mentioned in the case of Google and other tech companies, people have increasingly been moving away from this by saying, you know what, I think people can go to coding boot camps and learn on YouTube channels, like Lawrence's Sociology YouTube channel. They can learn on their own how to do many of these jobs, which we once thought needed credentials. But don't get too confused with that. For now, think, okay, well, the primary labor market is the main labor market that most people desire to enter into. So again, the title of this concept is, or the name of this concept is pretty self-explanatory. Now, the secondary labor market here refers to jobs essentially that people do not want. Some people may want them, but they're usually not people's ultimate end goals. So these are jobs you may have on a part-time basis while you're in high school or university. These are jobs that many recent immigrants find themselves in through credential devaluation. So say someone who's a doctor in their country of origin comes here, and then they still want to be a doctor, that's still their desired goal, but they have to write credential conversion tests, so they have to pass the Canadian medical exams, or for foreign lawyers having to study Canadian law here, and so on and so forth. So these are the sorts of jobs when on the test, when we had that question about McDonaldization, and again, kind of the increasing division of labor, having things more minimal, less autonomy, all of that. These are the jobs that are usually seen as ones that have been McDonaldized, meaning that they've become mass in scale, people have little autonomy, and they're ultimately called McJobs because they have few opportunities for growth, and they're a dime a dozen. So these would be the kind of jobs I had prior to going to university. So I said my first job, I was a production specialist. They gave me that fancy title to make it seem better than it was. Well, it was actually fine. I mean, I was 16 and it was good. I got unlimited donuts. I worked at Krispy Kreme, as I said. So and that you know, I probably could have worked my way up, but unfortunately the store closed after 13 months. But anyway, that's a typical job. You know, I was just doing the same thing all day and getting all these awful problems in my hands because I was dealing with all the yeast and whatever in the donuts without wearing gloves because they made my hands sweaty. So I was yeah. Anyway, so that was not ideal. And then after that, working at another bakery, and then working as a security guard, and then working as a busboy in a restaurant. So all of those would be McJobs again. I probably could have worked my way up to some extent, but they're not things, you know, most people would aim for after going to university or something. And those are the kind of jobs in the labor market I was trying to get out of. Remember, I had my own tertiary labor market. I wanted to be a pro gamer and then have all that autonomy and stuff, but then that didn't really work, and then I had all those jobs, and then said, okay, I'm going to take a more like normal route into the primary labor market. So again, that's a common story, I think. Not exactly the same as mine. We all have our own stories, but I think all of you now, you know, if you're working, you may be in the secondary labor market, and you're trying to get into the primary. And again, don't feel bad if that's what you're doing right now, because that is what most youth and people in university are doing. So in terms of human relations kind of within the jobs, it's important to look at the role of labor unions. So many jobs start out as secondary, they start out in the secondary labor market and may enter into the primary labor market. And conversely, many jobs may start in the primary labor market and then kind of decline or degrade into the secondary labor market. So what does this mean? Basically, this means some jobs get better over time in terms of their stability and room for growth and benefits, and some get worse. So labor unions are key in this practice. So for example, this was before, you know, you were at U of T, but I think I should know this because I was part of it. About 4 years ago, there was a strike at U of T, which you may have heard about, where teaching assistants went on strike. So teaching assistants are, you know, they're well paid, but they were grieving over the fact that their hours kept being reduced. So as a teaching assistant, you're protected by a union. And you know, basically the long and short of it was our tuition rates are going up, and yes, our hourly wage is fine, but we're increasingly getting less hours to work, and then this is impacting our ability to finish our PhDs and to teach undergraduates. So that was kind of the essence of the strike. And so that ability of people, or that fact of people banding together and negotiating for benefits, for salaries, for hourly wages, these are done both to boost certain jobs. So when a bunch of workers unionize, it's usually to get all of the hallmark things in the primary labor market. So benefits, more opportunities, job growth, promotions, pay increases, stability, all those things. And without unions, many jobs do end up falling into the secondary labor market because the things like promotions and pay increases may not become kind of structured into the job. So self-employment is interesting too, because we've only really been talking about, you know, most occupations that people apply for or apply to, you're working for someone else and you have a boss. And unions really only deal with those sorts of jobs as well. I mean, there are unions for self-employed people, but that's a big, messy other topic. Self-employment is on, it does constitute a major portion of the adult working population, and it's steadily been growing. So as I mentioned, things like YouTube influencers and whatever, there is a growing amount of people who, and pro gamers too. I mean, many are sponsored, but many make their money off of Twitch or Patreon and other things. Public intellectuals too. Think of even Jordan Peterson works at U of T, but then has all this money from other sources. Many political people do that as well. So there's increasingly been, using technology, there's increasingly been people opting for self-employment. And this, again, you could have there are whole courses on entrepreneurship and self-employment because incomes among the self-employed tend to be, on average, lower than those that are not self-employed, and they're very polarized. So many people that are self-employed make almost nothing. So I teach a course called Deviant Careers, where I look at people that do multi-level marketing. So, maybe you have friends on Facebook that are trying to sell makeup online, like Arbonne, or, you think of movies, you think of things like Avon Ladies, Pampered Chef, door-to-door Bible salesman. There's all these things that people do. Many of those people make almost nothing, and they work part-time, they like make a go of it, and then they stop. But then there are people, of course, that become, very well-paid consultants and freelancers and so on. So it's a very, very broad array. And again, there could be YouTubers like me that don't make anything, and then there could be whatever. I'm not up with the times, but there could be big. Someone said in one of the slides that they insulted me and they said you should watch PewPie or whatever. I don't know the names. So whatever that was. So apparently that PewPie makes they're at the top and I'm at the bottom of that. So anyway, so for now. So again, it's a very wide array. Okay, so as I said before, why our education week was really focused on McDonaldization and credentialization. Nowadays, if you don't have a university degree, it's not that you can't get the kind of job you want, but it's increasingly becoming more difficult. And that's really the negative way of saying that having a university degree has increasingly been increasing your odds of getting kind of those jobs in the primary labor market. So ever since 1990, there's been about a 4% increase. So you can just look here and I'll go back. So you see people with university degrees are the most likely to be participating in the labor market. And those that are high school dropouts, like I was, those are the least likely. And again, just not using anecdotes, but prior to university, all of my jobs, as I said, and most of my friends that didn't have high school, because we didn't have some connections into it anywhere, our jobs were all kind of undesirable secondary labor market jobs. So higher levels of education, again, increases the odds that you will find a job, period, any sort of job, and then you are more likely as well to get a job in the primary labor market, as those jobs are built around what Josh was saying, the sorts of core competencies that you learn. And, going back to the education week, a lot of it, as I'm sure you can just figure out on your own, and well, now as budding sociologists, a lot of it is just about norms in society, right? As I'm very open about, I said, when I was a high school dropout, it was very difficult for me at a personal level to think to apply to many jobs. I had a bank manager once actually come and talk to me. She took me out for lunch. I was working security at a bank, and I was a supervisor. It was a remote job, so I would sometimes work at banks, trade shows, different things. I worked at a bank in North York, and the bank manager, she often would just have small talk with me, and then she took me out for lunch, and she told me to apply at that bank, like to be a bank teller. She said, there's more room for growth. You can do this here. And then I said, oh, well, like, what are the requirements? And then she said, oh, just all you need is high school. And she's like, which I'm sure you have. You must, right? And then I just kind of nodded, and I was like, oh, that's another opportunity I can't have. So again, that's something, even I'm seeing the statistic here. You see the biggest gap is between less than high school and university. There are jobs. I've known people that have worked up exactly at that moment that happened. One of my friends had just become a bank manager, an older friend that did go to college. And he said, yeah, for a bank, all you need is high school, but unfortunately for TD or whatever it was, they said that's like an absolute requirement. So again, when we discussed credentialization, kind of the criticism was, okay, high school has now become university, university has now become the new high school in terms of requirements, and what's next? Will it keep going up? I had you kind of do a discussion question about that. But again, it's not all bad, because in the university context, you are still learning a lot of amazing things, and such as critical thinking and analytical skills and all of those nice core competencies that Josh was talking about. Okay, so we're nearing the end. So in terms of theories, this week isn't a super conceptual week compared to some of the other ones. The textbook does talk about multiple theories that cover this, but I think just talking about the kind of core 3 classic ones is good at this point in the course. So essentially we can, and I'll have a discussion question, but I think as a sociologist, or as anyone, again, you guys have been tested twice, you've written 2 papers, you're going to be doing your own research soon. I want to push you to just always take everything in this course to the practical level. So in terms of studying work and the economy, as a sociologist, I think the most pertinent question is, to what extent does work actually work for people, right? So on the one hand, so you have the functionalist perspective, or the kind of classical approach. Again, I talked about the course I'm teaching in industrial organizational psychology. On the one hand, you have a view of work as something that is really enabling people to better themselves. So people can, refine their skills. People can be part of a broader community through the division of labor. So say, I can take pride in the fact that I'm an educator teaching this one discipline, and I'm part of a community of scholars, and I'm relying on people like farmers and clothing makers. So I can see myself as part of this organic whole. Remember Durkheim, he said, organic societies are organic, or contemporary societies are organic because we all rely on one another, as opposed to simpler societies where we're divided mechanically, meaning that we could all be doing similar things. There could be a lot of overlap where it's more inhuman. So the positive side of work, or the answer to this question, is that yes, work allows you at a personal level to find meaning, but it also allows a society to become more complex and more integrated and more human and organic. And again, that's usually associated with Durkheim and functionalism. But then on the other hand, and this has become increasingly important, so things like Occupy Wall Street and other social movements, you have people saying, well, actually, I think on balance, work is alienating people. I think the rich are getting richer. I'm seeing, you just talked about how people in the primary labor market are often being pushed to the secondary labor market. If work was so good for people, why would we need unions? Why are people being exploited? Why isn't everyone getting the jobs that they want? So this is more to do with conflict theory. And this ventures out also into things like the gender wage gap, things like the decredentialization of immigrants, of immigrant degrees, or degrees from other countries that immigrants have. The fact that people with less than university education have a very hard time finding jobs. All of these things kind of answer that broad question of, does work work for people, more in the negative. And this is really a perennial debate. In my other course, I actually, I found like 3 articles that all had different positions on this. And the last week of the course is called, to be or not to be employed. and it was, because literally, especially now, right? I'm sure some of you know, just show of hands if any of, I sometimes forget what I say, but show of hands if any of you know about guaranteed basic income. Or, yeah. Okay. So one of you knows. So anyway, so a few of you. Okay, so guaranteed basic income, again, it's been piloting around. There's been some projects, and it's a very divisive topic. But basically, it's the idea that everyone would be guaranteed a certain level of income. So sort of like welfare, but not. It wouldn't have the stigma or the conditionality attached to it. It would just be everyone in society is given a certain base level of income, and then if you want to work, you can on top of that. But it would be, providing you a kind of blanket level social security. So, of course, people of the negative bent in terms of work, they would say, having this would then give people the choice. And, since so much work has been automated, there is a lot more money going around in the hands of less people. So this would be kind of a redistribution, which then may have positive effects for that. And then symbolic insert. So I've been framing it more around conflict and functionalism because I think when you study work and labor, most things fall into one of those 2 camps. Symbolic interactionism then, again, is more agnostic theoretically. Again, it's more of a method. And they say, okay, let's not get into this big issue, and let's just see how people find meaning at work. So they go out and they do interviews, they do ethnography, sometimes they do surveys, but they're just interested in how people find experience at work. So I know I'm running a bit late, so I won't get into the next study buddy activity. But I've tried to cover some of it myself. But I'd just like you to think. So again, I do think that's the central question. So in contemporary society, do you think that work helps people integrate with one another, or does it kind of prompt them to become alienated? I think that thinking through this question as a sociologist, you should go one step further, right, and say, okay, clearly work can be meaningful for some people, but for other people it isn't. And so what social factors influence this process? So, which demographics of society are more likely to find their work meaningful? We saw that people with university education are more likely to have jobs, so maybe they would be more likely to find work meaningful. Maybe high school dropouts would find work less meaningful. And why? Well, maybe they're more likely to be in the secondary labor market. So again, thinking through these questions I think is useful to help you connect everything in this course. Draw on those themes. Think, would men or women be more satisfied by work, and why? Who has a leg up when they're applying for jobs? Would whites or non-whites typically be, or would you think they would be finding themselves more integrated? All of these sorts of questions, again, will prompt you to think through other topics. So we're almost done. So in terms of what's left, there's just a few slides left. My slides got all messed up. That's funny. Okay. So global economic systems. So I've mentioned this. These are pretty self-evident, although they sound complicated and jargony. So global economic systems, we'll see there are 3, but really 2, that we'll discuss in this course. So capitalism is often, it's a word that's used very often. You may hear the word neoliberalism or neoliberal capitalism. For all intents and purposes, these terms are all grounded in the assumption that the means of production, remember that Marxist term, how goods are produced, that these are owned privately. Now, the defining features of this is private ownership, the ability to pursue personal profit, and that there is competition among business. Now, those all seem like things that occur, so why do you think pure capitalism might exist? There's one line here that you may disagree with. No, I mean, not that line, obviously. But so why does pure capitalism not exist? If I just said those defining features seem appropriate. Yep?
Because our government provides some services for the citizens.
Exactly, right. So remember, pure capitalism, so people critique capitalism a lot. Pure capitalism doesn't exist. Pure capitalism would be everything owned privately. Now, capitalist societies, when people really say that, what they mean is more state/welfare capitalism. So even the most usually it's people that fall more on the right hand of the political spectrum. Although many right-leaning people are very pro-state as well. Again, the politics is very difficult. But typically, when you think of right and left, right is like reduce taxes. Left is usually increase taxes, redistribution, and things like that. Now, even the most, tax-reducing sort of person, or that thinks, people should be more responsible or whatever it is, most of those individuals will still believe that state and basic welfare services are needed. So things like healthcare, education, employment insurance, some level of safety net. And so at a personal level, this is often just, people doing thought experiments saying, well, what if someone is born with severe disenfranchisement? What if they are born to abusive parents? What if they are an orphan? X, Y, Z. So many people will go through that thought process and say, okay, some level of collective good distribution should exist. Where people, again, divide is how much should the government have power over our lives, meaning how much tax dollars should go to the government to redistribute, how much money should go towards government policies. This is where people get in big arguments because they say, on the one hand, you could say, yes, we need to trust the government with this because they will have our best interest and we can, be accountable and make sure that people that are very disenfranchised still get options in life. But on the other hand, you could have people say, why am I going to trust these bureaucrats with my money? So, and that's, it could be why are government officials the best people for the job? Why not let people hash it out in the private sector? So these are questions that have not gone away, and countries do vary. So think of the United States and historically not having public health care. But then Obamacare coming in, and then now in the current presidential reign, now Obamacare kind of being scaled back and changed. So these are questions that come up. Again, so capitalism is the idea of private ownership. We are in a capitalist society, but a capitalist society that's also seen as having state ownership as well. And then lastly for this course, there's socialism, not to be confused with communism. But socialism is, again, going one step kind of further in terms of state ownership. So again, let's just say on the far left-hand side of the page, you have capitalism. The far right-hand side, you would have communism. Socialism would be close to that, but it's not fully that. It's saying, okay, we should definitely have centralized collective ownership rather than a bunch of private owners. And in doing so, we can all be parts of the demos. Remember, democracy. And so demos is the people, the kind of state of the people. And so we are the people. We should all be in charge collectively of where our money is going. Welfare and state capitalism does that somewhat, but we're still letting kind of people own too much private business. And this is why we're seeing so much inequality. Okay, and so lastly, Max Weber is kind of the core theorist, so that talks about how people are managed in capitalism. So we've kind of moved to capitalism. I talked about Durkheim and Marx as kind of being the core theorists in terms of how people view work. But when people discuss capitalism, they usually discuss Max Weber. So as I said, his famous work was The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, where his central empirical question was, what enabled modern capitalism, so industry by way of private ownership, what enabled the growth of that in the West versus other countries where it didn't quite become a staple of human life, or an organizing principle. So when studying when studying capitalism, he found, as we'll see on the next slide, that what enabled the growth of capitalism was bureaucracy. And so why was bureaucracy important? Well, you should see in these terms Weber's influence on Gramsci. So remember, Gramsci said, okay, too much of Marxist thought and historical sociological thought has said that the state kind of dominates people's lives. What Weber said when he looked at capitalist industries and capitalist economies, he said, well, the state definitely does impact our lives and shape our lives and govern it, but it does so more implicitly. The state exerts power over us, so it can do what it wants in the face of our resistance. So what does that mean? I can resist laws, but if I do, I'll be arrested. I can resist working, but if I do, then I'll be homeless. I technically have the agency to resist any social norms, but I'll bear the price. So the state has power over me. The state does not dominate me. So domination, again, is when an entire group of people or a person could be forced to comply with commands. Again, I could deviate from my expectations. I can quit my job. I can rebel against society. I can do all of these things. I have the agency to do that, but there are repercussions. So I'm not being fully dominated, but there's power being exerted over me that's kind of making me think, hey, it's not in my best interest to do that. So ultimately, Weber was one of the first theorists to say, rather than frame the relationship of the economy or society more generally on a person's life as a position or as a relationship of power or domination, it makes more sense to look at it in terms of authority. So this is, authority is the extent to which members of a society or a group view the domination that they're, or view the leadership that they're experiencing, whether they view it as legitimate and hence as, you know, a proper use of power. So say a prime minister or a president who's using the power they have in their station, whether they're using that legitimately or whether they're unduly and tyrannically dominating us. So Weber, as we'll see, said that societies tend to have one of three different kinds of authority. So again, people that have been trusted to have power over us, but to do so in a way that's not domination. So again, really when you think of what authority is, it's like accepted domination. It's saying, okay, obviously I can't question the laws in Canada or whatever, I'm going to get arrested, so technically I'm being dominated, I can't like go against it. I can, but I'll get arrested. But that's very different from living in a society where you don't even have the option. So again, think of gender relations, for example. So think of the domination of women prior to the vote. So as a woman, prior to the vote in Canada, you couldn't vote at all. That's very different from today, where you can vote, but there are still things like gender disparities in work and things that still aren't perfect about gender relations. So here Weber is saying, again, power and domination are real, but it's more about the level of authority that exists and how people feel about that. Remember, and this is very key too, Weber was the core founder of symbolic interactionism, right? Remember we discussed that. So he's very focused on what he called Verstehen, or interpretation. And so while Durkheim just looked at laws and social facts, Weber said, what are people's relations to these things? Are they accepting the society that they're in? So he found that societies went through a kind of phase. They would usually start in what was called traditional authority. So this is where power is legitimated through birthright. So I said the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment were largely backlashes to this form of governance structure. So this started in tribal societies where the chief would kind of be born into that role and then would govern their tribe. The switch from traditional to rational legal is mediated, meaning there's something in between it, which is what's called charismatic authority. So charismatic authority is interesting. It's usually not permanent, but that's when you have someone that you think of as they could be a major reformer or a social justice advocate. So someone like Martin Luther King. Many people right now think Trump is a charismatic leader. He's someone who's shaking up the status quo. Charismatic authority is something that shifts people to whatever the imagined next phase of governance is. So here, the person has, quote unquote, personal magnetism, and they can channel people for their support. And then rational legal authority is present when power is legitimated through laws and rules. Now, importantly, in North America, you might say, oh, what? Like before Trump, it wasn't traditional. Rational legal authority, what we see as being rational, what we see as being the status quo, is often disrupted by charismatic leaders. So again, think of what's happening in America right now. Things are about the border, about global trade, about race relations. All of these things are being in tumult, in large part by a charismatic leader coming in and saying, hey, we need to make America great again, we need to do this, this has to happen, and many people support that, many people don't. It's a big divisive topic, but I think it's a great example of just showing one charismatic authority in practice. Again, I'm trying to do that with all of you, getting you ramped up about sociology. And I'm not a permanent leader, and I'm not going to change the nature of sociology by doing that, but hopefully I'll help all of you see that sociology as a discipline should have rational authority over your undergraduate educations, and it should be your major. And then so lastly, how does capitalism work for Weber? I mentioned bureaucracy. So part of the charismatic leader, and again, I keep saying this class, there's so many things we could have independent lectures and classes on. Bureaucracy is at the core of contemporary society and really was sparked by the Enlightenment. And that may sound strange, but remember what the Enlightenment was. It was people saying, you know what? Everyone is really the same. We all are biological organisms with minds. We're not put into different statuses by the caste we're born into, by divine right, by anything preordained. We're all humans, and what makes us similar is our capacity to think and reason. Bureaucracy is the formalization of social life and saying, okay, we're all rational, so what we should do is we should make our societies rational. So rather than let people have certain kinds of jobs or bar people from certain jobs, so things, racist policies across countries that ban, say, people of African origin, black presenting individuals from jobs, get rid of those things and make people's entry into the labor market based on fair, competitive measures. So things like education, things like job training, rather than ascribed characteristics. So bureaucracy, when you use the term negatively, and like I did with the joke about government workers to some people being bureaucrats, the negative side of bureaucracy is that we take the rational side of employment and society too far. So that's someone, using checklists saying, no, you can't apply for this because you need 6+ years and you have 5.5. No, you can't take this course because you need these 11 prerequisites, and even though you have this other one that's identical to the 11th one, it's not exactly the same one on paper, so you can't do this. So bureaucrat is someone that follows the rules too strongly. But bureaucracy to Weber was a huge boon. We couldn't have the kinds of growing equality that we have without bureaucracy. Because again, what bureaucracy did was it disempowered leaders. It disempowered the charismatic authority person, the charismatic leader, saying, you know what? No one person can come in and disrupt a society. We have these mechanisms that you have to go through. So again, in the case of America, many people are super happy or super upset when certain presidents are elected, but part of the American governance structure is that it's very hard to change laws, and it's very hard for one member of parliament, even the president, to make major changes. So most modern democracies, they have that built in, so that one person can't come in and then through charismatic channeling of people really radically change the society. And again, the features of bureaucracies, these are all things, again, this was written before 1946, but that's just one of the additions, but written closer to the beginning of the 20th century. These are all things that should be familiar. So there's an extensive division of labor. There are written policies and procedures, ongoing written records, hierarchy of authority. So again, there's professors, there's department chairs, there's teaching assistants, we're all different ranks. And then performance-based hiring and promotion rather than nepotism, so hiring family and friends, or racism and things like that. So again, those things do obviously play a part. There is unfair hiring, unfair promotions, unfair firing and things. You know, as sociologists, we're interested in inequality and how it creeps into the bureaucracy. But bureaucracy in a pure state is rational, codified rules. Again, no one person is deciding whether you pass or fail a course or get a university degree. It's, do you have, you know, 20 half credits, or whatever number, do you have 20 full credits? Do you have the programs that meet, the courses that meet your major requirements? That's a case of bureaucracy. I can't come in and say, oh, well, you know, you got 90 or whatever on all your assignments, but overall I think you deserve a 40 or something. I would never do that, but I can't do that. So that is going against the policy, and I wouldn't do that. And like with test number 1, as you know, certain people are emailing me, or sorry, test 2, saying, can you cancel it because of the weather? And I said, I can't. The university decides whether the campus is closed or not. I said, if they close it, then the test is off. If it's open, then the test is on. I have no choice there. So whether that's good or bad, again. So last thing, so questions to think about. Describe work from a theoretical perspective, so think of it through functionalist, conflict, and symbolic interactionist. And think about how economies have changed over time. So again, the different economies we've talked about, it's not always a linear thing. I'm not judging or calling ahistorical societies that are in other economies, but grounded again in the work of Weber, we see that societies have tended to go in these stages. Okay, so lastly, so I have a question, and we have our weekly thing, so I'm all excited. So do you have any questions about this so far? Anything presented? Yep.
You talked about some jobs being in the primary sector, then like primary industry, then falling down to secondary. Like, can you give an example of that?
So those, great question. So those are jobs that are increasingly becoming more part-time. So one could argue that professors are falling into that category. So for example, professors, you know, there were many more tenure track jobs and stable jobs. Now increasingly there are contract-based ones. Benefits are being taken away. Pharmacy is another industry where different drugstores and hospitals are hiring less pharmacists and more pharmacy assistants as a way to kind of pay people of the industry less. Doctors as well, there are increasing amounts more in America than here, but of people of colleges and universities that have courses in what's called physician assistant. So there's a de-skilling of many occupations that's happening. So they won't switch to the secondary market overnight, but the fear of many professionals is that they're increasingly kind of taking the prestige and the stability out of many jobs. Okay. So it should be live now. It is. Oh, someone knows. Someone's... Oh, good. Oh, I have one more subscriber. Lucky number 69. Okay. So, yeah, no. Yeah, did I say that out loud? Yeah. So, yeah.
Hello. I'm Lawrence. Just in case you didn't know. Today, I'm going to do something different. Are you ready? Because I am. How many people think revolution is so easy? Here I am, sitting in a city that's part of the larger whole, part of an ordered society one word, and I am another. Oh, the people, they revolted and they thought, oh, you know, I'll just give up everything of the past and it'll be fine. No, I went on the streets and people were sad, they were gloomy. Oh, okay. Well, let me interject in your sob story. I can understand why you think that revolting is a bad thing. I can understand it. As a bourgeois person, undoubtedly you are. You feel that revolution is against your interests. And you frame society as some organic thing of being, because you see yourself as being represented. But what about those who don't? Now, admittedly, I'm not a proletarian, someone without any means to subsist other than their own freedom. I wish they had for people like you. But I do see that one day all of the proletariat will get together and revolt against people like you and your discipline, which is great. Now, the two of you, way too much time. Carl, way too much fighting. Emil, I'm really surprised with what you have to say about society being like a human itself. And Carl, I think it's a little bit nasty of you to say that Emil thinks that society can be society, and everyone like you needs to be revolted against. I see both sides. I see that society is the product of human endeavors, and it endows us with capacities that we may not even know we have. But at the same time, once constructed, and take where we live, it can take on a life of its own, as you say, in Emil's species finality. But that doesn't have to be good. I mean, sure, while the Protestant ethic remains, people may really enjoy it. But what about when industry takes over that religious spirit? And then, why do people work? What will they be doing things for? I don't know. But people crave meaning, and this is what I have. Okay, well, I've heard what you both have to say, and nonsense. To you, Carl, you are just so deluded. It's because of people like you that I exist and I form sociology. I use Kant instead of my influence instead of Hegel. You nonsense. You leave that out of the universe. I really don't know what I'm saying so much. You think people will somehow all come together and will unite against what? Against the very thing that gave them the capacity to revolt? You deluded. And they were, mass, I should call you, I guess. You have some element of sense, unlike Carl. You talk about bureaucracy, and you discuss how it generates our capacity. So people living in a rationalized society, although, of course, you're right, they cast off religion too quickly. With bureaucracy, they do have the capacity, at least, to function as a full society. But I don't know why you think that necessarily has to lead to people living in an iron cage. I mean, why can't bureaucracy become the new religion? Maybe we have something to talk about, because you're right, bureaucracy may have replaced religion too quickly. You know, that was my point when I was talking about the French Revolution, that people were casting off priorities and being too quickly. How dare you call me delusional? You really know what you're saying. Of course this will happen. Of course this will happen. It just has to. It's an unfolding dialectical relationship. Once you have exposed the essence of the exploitation of the masses, they will be forced. Once they see that they are so chained in their freedom, they will have no choice but to revolt. Now, well, all I can say at this point is, I guess we we have to agree to disagree, you know. And Carl, you and I share a similar passion, being slightly pessimistic. You're more optimistic in terms of how people can come together. I don't really know what I think about that. But Emil, I definitely agree that we should discuss these issues. Well, okay, you know what? If you two are just going to romance, then I have to really tell you, you are a nonsense machine. And I hope sociology does not have to be recreated. Now, okay, well, fine. If that's how you're going to be, then I'm going to go. Emil, out! Now. I don't know how to improve. What's his deal? I'm just being a boss. Now. You two go into the children.
Okay, so any feedback would be appreciated so I can perfect my art, my side hustle. I actually got that from my partner. He calls people nonsense machines. So I like that. It's a good. Zoolander, yeah. Well, I was trying to do a voice that wasn't like an accent, so I was just trying to make up like a fake voice. So I probably was influenced by that. Oh. Yeah, see, now you'll always be thinking of Marx, Weber, and Durkheim and thinkers, right? That's the idea, to make this fun. Yeah, I know. I realized I left the shirts on the chair beside me. But so maybe that was intentional. It was like meta. Yeah, it does look like Heisenberg, Breaking Bad. Definitely. That little hat. Diluted. Yeah, okay, so I was going to say that. That's hilarious. Was it hard sitting and waiting for your other parts to finish? It was. So I recorded 3 videos, and then it was all like stream of consciousness, because I was like, I don't want to have a script because I want it to be spontaneous. And so I did Durkheim first. So like I talked, and then I just sat there like looking, like imagining what Marx and Weber were going to say. So then I was like looking angry and like whatever. And then I had to use my editing software to like put them around in other orders. So that's why there's flashes and the now is repeating itself, which I kept in because I showed. So my partner's the filmmaker, and he's like, "Oh my God, this is like classic French cinema, like Godard. You're like, it's all avant-garde," and it's like. It was all accidental, and then he said, "No, that's good though. That's art. The best art is accidental." So, yeah. PewDiePie. Oh, it's PewDiePie. Subscribe to PewDiePie. My troll is here. So they. But it's okay. So, you see. Okay, yeah. So these, it's often fun. I mean, these thinkers, they're presenting those are like the 3 positions of sociology, right? So again, one is like fearful of change due to what's going on in France. One is like wanting change because of what's going on in Germany and Britain. And then another one is like more ambivalent, Weber. So, and that's where you see functionalists in conflict and symbolic interactionism. So, I mean, I'm making it fun there, but I think those are really, it's fun, I think, to think of sociology that way because unlike, yeah, I was stretching and contorting all the images. Unlike other disciplines, this one is quite like fragmented. So that's something I find interesting. Okay, and then just for my own whatever, I'd like to know, just so what do you plan on majoring in? I think you can write more than one word in this, so you could do like, I don't know, chemistry and geology or whatever it is. That's probably not going to be that common in this class. Psychology. Okay. You being lit, 2 separate ones. I love how that, look, see, that's a sign, right? Look at that, right? You being lit. Yeah, okay. See? Fate. Okay. I think psychology is, because I look at class enrollment, psychology is like massive at this campus, so I'm not surprised by that. Okay, good. Yeah, psychology and sociology go really well. I mean, I do more psychology now than sociology, ironically, but they go really well together. So if I could go back in time, I would have psychology at least as a minor. YouTubing. Human bio, anthropology, music, health, being lit, your next minor in IDS. My next class. Okay. All right. So I should know in the next few weeks too, on that note, if I'm teaching I think I'm teaching at St. George in the summer, but I'll talk more about that in the last class. I mean, I take whatever I can get, so but I should be teaching here in the fall, so I have to find out what courses I'll have. So if you take, like Josh said, if you take those prereqs in whatever's available, I'll find out as soon as I get the calendar, or once it's up. But I should hopefully be teaching like a 3rd-year course next year. So one thing at U of T, you can take 3rd and 4th year before being in 3rd and 4th year, as long as you have the prereqs in most programs, right? So I took 4th year seminars in 2nd year. It's not necessarily harder. It's just more focused and smaller and more independent. But I'm happy to talk about that in the final class. Okay, so that's us for this week. Again, questions to think about. And if you and your study buddies meet at a coffee shop or whatever, do the second activity. All right, thanks. I'm excited.